Hey, this is Matt from Custom Car Grills with an install video for the 2018 and newer Hyundai Sonata that's not equipped with front collision detection. In this video, we're using an OEM grill and bezel that was just removed from the vehicle. The grill and bezel didn't seem to want to separate easily, so I'm leaving them together. To protect the outer bezel from scratches, I'm going to grab some tape. I'll apply this tape right up to the prominent edge where the bezel and stock mesh meet. Pretty much any basic tape will work for this step. I just had some blue painter's tape lying around, and that should be readily available at most hardware stores. Okay, so now that I've got it all taped up, I'll grab an open-ended handsaw to get to work cutting out the mesh. This is a hard ABS plastic, but it cuts fairly easily. I'm trying to keep a little distance from the edge with my blade. I don't really want to need to do any more repair than what's needed. Because the stock mesh is so large, there really isn't a lot of points to cut through compared to other OEM grills that we've worked on. With all the proper cuts made, the inside of the stock grill should be easily removed and can be thrown away. Now it's time to grab our Dremel and equip it with the number 543 cutting and shaping wheel. This cutoff wheel will let me trim back the mesh a little further, which will save me the trouble of doing any extra sanding later on. Just like with the saw blade though, I'm leaving a pinch of material still left so that I don't dig into the grill with this tool. It may take a few different angles of approach to get all the right cuts in all the right places. On the top of the cutting and shaping wheel, it's abrasive and can be used to do some rough sanding on the remaining protruding bits to get them flush. After that, I can equip the sanding drum and use this to strip off the chrome on the inner edge. There doesn't need to be a lot of pressure here. I'm just letting the tool do most of the work. It's best to not stay in one spot too long. Just like with the other steps, I don't want to dig too far into the edge. Here's a quick shot at our work thus far. There's just a little bit of chrome still remaining. Once it's all been removed, I'll grab some 100 or 150 grit sandpaper. This will be used to smooth out the inner edge a little bit, as well as the low grit sandpaper can provide enough abrasiveness to have something for the repair material to grab onto. If we wanted to keep the bezel the factory finish, this is where the tape I applied earlier would come into play. So now that there's a fully gutted and sanded grill, but we're still left with a really big problem. There's some pretty big gaps from where the stock mesh was, and since it's hollow, I'm going to need to repair those areas. To start this, I'm going to grab some aluminum tape. Tape like this works really well because it'll conform really well to the surface and will provide an excellent temporary barrier for our repair material. There's many small gaps from the cuts, so there's quite a bit to patch up here. Here's a quick look at the back of the tape. I built the barrier up quite high to give me plenty of room to account for any extra runoff. Some of these larger gaps would be quite difficult to manage without something like this tape. For the actual repairing of the plastic, I like to use Valvoline's Plyo Grip Plastic Repair number 3. This stuff works really great for projects like this. It's easy to dispense and it cures really quick. I can usually get to sanding quickly with it, and it bonds to almost everything. Once I've laid down a bead of Plyo Grip, I like to evenly spread it around the area so that there's not too much buildup in a specific spot. In this case, I'm using a toothpick, but something like a small paintbrush can also work well. Here's a close-up look at the application in one of the lower corners. It's just as simple as applying a moderate amount of Plyo Grip and then evenly spreading out the excess. Once this is cured, then the aluminum tape can be removed and discarded. As long as I got the tape in there tight to begin with, then there should be minimal sanding to do later. Although the tape is quite sticky, it should be able to be easily removed. With all the tape off, this is how everything should be looking. All the holes are filled and the grill frame is starting to take shape again. I'm grabbing some more sandpaper to smooth out any unevenness that we may now have from the Plyo Grip. There shouldn't be too much to sand down here, but at a minimum I need to get a good scuff on all the surfaces for the finishing putty to adhere to. Speaking of finishing putties, I like to use blaze glaze for most of our projects. To start, I'll dispense a moderate amount of the putty on a piece of cardboard. From there, it's just a matter of adding a pinch of hardener, like so, and then starting to mix it together. After a minute or so, it should start to become a consistent color, and then it's ready to apply. A plastic squeegee helps quite a bit with applying materials like this. Applying putty is a time-sensitive step. This will start to cure quickly, so I need to act on this before it starts to harden up. Some good even straight lines like this are a good start to putting a finished edge on this part of the project. It might take a few different angles of approach to get the putty in all the needed areas. To get this smooth, I'm going to grab the sandpaper one last time. This will need a couple passes from some finer grit papers because we'll end up painting this edge and we want it to look super smooth. For some of the straighter lines, sanding blocks can help quite a bit with keeping an even edge. Okay, so I have all the sanding done on the repair, and this is starting to look real good. Before painting though, there's a little cutting still left, and this is going to be easier to see if I flip the grill around. I'm grabbing my cutting and shaping wheel again because the back of the grill edge needs to be recontoured. Again, the top of the cutting wheel is highly abrasive, and by making a few passes like this, I can shave the back edge flat and consistent. Of course, a lot of caution needs to be used here, because if I dig too deep, then I'll need to go back and redo a lot of the work to fix it again. To get a consistent edge thickness, I'm also trimming back any excess plyo grip that there may be left from the repair. This can be a key step to getting our mesh fitting correctly, and it's best to double check the fit of the mesh during this step. Well, this is it. The inner part of the grill shell is looking whole again, and the edges are all looking nice and smooth. The protective tape can now be removed, and if we did everything right, the bezel should still be in really good condition. There's a bit of a decision that we need to make at this point. We can either paint the inner area and leave the bezel chrome, or paint the whole thing. For this install, we chose to combine the inner part and the bezel to make it look like one seamless grill shell. This may involve a little bit more sanding in the dividing area if there's a lip. Before painting, we sanded the chrome some, and that way the paint will have something to grab onto. For the paint job, we went with an all gloss black setup, and it turned out amazing, as seen here. This combined look of the bezel and the old mesh area looks great, and we don't even have the mesh in yet. Speaking of which, here's a look at the mesh piece that we have for sale on our website. This comes pre-cut and pre-bent with all the right cuts made to accommodate all the right cutouts on the stock grill. To install the mesh, I'm first going to flip the grill frame around because the mesh goes on the back side of it. Next, the mesh should just fit right into place. Again, keep in mind that this mesh wraps around the outer part of the opening and does not fit on the inside of it. To temporarily hold the mesh tight against the frame, I'm first going to grab some cable ties and foam. The foam helps protect the painted finish of the grill frame, while the ties help pull the mesh tight against the back of the opening. It's best to not over tighten the ties, but they do need to be on there firm to get a good hold. Here's a good close-up of this step. It's just as simple as looping the tie around the frame and then through the mesh. I like having the tail end of the tie on the back of the mesh for a good hold. Repeat this until the whole mesh piece is firmly pressed up against the back of the grill. Once all the ties are in place, the tail ends can be cut off and thrown away. To bond the mesh to the frame, I'm just simply going to use the rest of the plyo grip that I have left over from earlier. There's not a whole lot of room to work in here, because I need to leave some room for the outer bezel for the reinstallation. I'm just doing my best to get the plyo grip in and around the areas where the mesh contacts the frame. The stuff cures fast, so I'm working quickly to get this in place before it sets up. To make sure I don't have too much built up on the mesh, I'll run a toothpick across the back of it to smooth it out and spread around any excess that I might have. Once this cures, the ties can be cut off and thrown away along with the foam. The mesh install is now complete. Let's flip it around and see how it turned out. Wow, this looks amazing! This is a huge transformation from what we started with. The mesh and grill frame looks seamless, and this all black finish looks amazing. It's taken a lot of work and patience to get this to where it is, but I think this is all going to pay off when we have it on the car. To get this on the bumper, several cuts will need to be made for it to fit on. Since I've added a little bit of material to the inside edge, the new grille will be too large to fit inside of the bumper opening. The cuts that need to be made are roughly along this line, but it's extremely important to retain the slots for the bezel to still be reinstalled. Once the cuts are made, the grille should fit right back onto the bumper, and as seen here, looks great on the car. All in all, this is a challenging but rewarding installation. This completely transforms the look of the car and is a must-have mod for any owner looking to remove the factory logo. If you have any questions about this mod, then feel free to contact us, and thanks for watching.